From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ollie. It's the last day in September. I bet you knew that. September 30th, it is 2019. Monday's programme, the start of a brand new week. Hope you've had a good weekend. I hope your Monday wasn't too taxing. You might just be beginning it, depending on where you are in the world. Thanks for joining me, though. Love that you do. Love that you're here. Two terrific guests, I think, lined up for you today. And as usual, I do hope to hear from you during the programme. You know how to do that, so just go and do it.
Richie Allen.
That's the one. Welcome to the programme.
It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Now, Alison Chabloz returns to the programme today. You'll know that last year Alison was convicted of sending an offensive, indecent or menacing message through a public communications network, and she was given a suspended sentence. It was about satirical songs she wrote about the Holocaust and Anne Frank. She appealed against it but lost. But last week she was ordered back to court. They claimed that she had breached the terms of her probation by basically blogging on her website, right? And she was sentenced to 8 weeks in prison. Now, thankfully, she's not in prison. She's out on unconditional bail and is going to be speaking with me in the second hour. Alison Chabloz joins the programme. And this hour, I'm joined again, and I always enjoy his company, by the 3rd Viscount Monckton of Brenchley. I love saying that. Christopher Monckton joins the programme. Public speaker, politician, hereditary peer. We're going to be talking about Brexit, but also about climate change as well, with Christopher Monckton, who's on the programme this hour. Monday's programme, live on the usual channels, richieallen.co.uk, and multiple platforms, as you know. Yeah. Oh, sorry I didn't do the paper review this morning. I had a pressing engagement, you see, which I'd forgotten about. I am absolutely useless, me. And I am beginning to wonder about it and worry about it, and how forgetful I've become in the last 6 months or so. And I got so worried about it. I'm not joking now when I say this. I got so worried about it that I did a Cambridge or Oxford devised test just to make sure that it isn't serious, if you know what I mean. So I did a test. I'm okay. I'm compos mentis, but I've become very forgetful about stuff. So I had an engagement, so I didn't do the paper review. That returns tomorrow morning, Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. That old garbage that we do, you and me. Now, let's kick off a little bit with Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister. He's in Manchester at the GMX. It's not called the GMX anymore, but that's a sign of getting old. You refer to things by names they had many moons ago, and you don't change. You just don't go with the times. It's the GMX. That's where the Conservatives are, Tory conference. And Johnson has insisted that allegations about his personal conduct are false. Right? And they're not overshadowing the conference, says Boris Johnson. Now, Charlotte Edwards is a journalist, and she's accused Johnson, the Prime Minister, of touching her thigh and that of another woman at a lunch back in 1999, which he denies. Rumours were circulating at the conference that the other woman is Mary Wakefield, who's married to his chief advisor, but she's rejected that. Johnson said, people don't want to hear about this. They want to hear about my plans to improve their lives. Here he is being interviewed briefly by Sky News journalist Kate McCann, the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister, it has been alleged that you touched the thigh of a woman at a lunch without her permission. Did you?
No, and I think what the public want to hear is about what we're doing to level up and unite the country, and the announcement...
No, did you drop the hand, Boris? Boris, did you drop the hand? That's what we want to know.
We're making today the announcements that Sajid Javid, the Chancellor, is going to be making.
Did you drop the hand?
All about infrastructure, fantastic roads programme.
I'm afraid I do have to take you back to that allegation. Are you suggesting you're saying it didn't happen, that she made it up?
I'm just saying what I've said, and I think that what the public want to hear is what we're doing for them and for the country and for investment in ways of uniting the country.
You clearly want to talk about policy, but there are questions about your personal life. There is another allegation about Jennifer Arcuri that you gave her special access when you were Mayor of London. Do you feel that these questions are overshadowing your conference now?
Not at all. I think what the public want to hear is what we're doing to bring the country together and get on with improving their lives. And I think I made one general comment, Kay. I think there's a lot of people who basically want to stop us delivering Brexit on October the 31st. But I have to tell you that we are not going to be deterred from that ambition. We're going to get on and do it, and we're going to get us over the line. And I think that that is the best thing for the country.
Yeah, the journalist there, Kate McCann, put the questions to Johnson. A little bit later, she spoke to her presenter back at base and said that these allegations are not going to go away, about dropping the hand and about giving favours to the American businesswoman whom he probably had a fling with. Kate McCann.
That's what the questions that he faces are about. And those are very difficult questions for the leader of a significant political party, for the Prime Minister. Those are very difficult questions. It's not the position that Boris Johnson would like to be in. He's come here to Manchester as a relatively new leader. It feels like it's been a long time, but it hasn't. He should be here, walking around the conference centre, going to the parties and events, being able to talk to his party about all the things that he would like to do. But instead, he's having to face these questions, and they are important questions. They are questions that need to be answered, and they are questions that will not go away until he does answer them. Now, he has flat out denied that allegation about touching a journalist underneath a table, but there are the other allegations which he hasn't formally commented on. He has said everything that was done while he was London Mayor was fine, it was all as it should be, and that investigation will go on, and clearly Mr Johnson believes it will clear him. But the fact that that investigation is happening at all is a tricky thing for him here, particularly when he wants to try and push the agenda on.
Yeah. We'll hear more about dropping the hand in a minute. If it's proven that while he was Mayor of London, he was having a dalliance with an American lady, and if her business interests were somehow advanced, well, he's finished. If that is the case, right? But I don't know anything about any of that. About the dropping the hand then on the journalist Charlotte Edwards back in 1999. That's 20 years ago, by the way. Just in case you can't do your mathematics, I had to use an abacus. I still have an abacus. And it's 20 years ago. There was a bit of an argument on Sky today between former Labour advisor Ayesha Hazarika, former Labour advisor, and Alex Dean, who used to advise David Cameron. They were on the Kay Burley show, and Kay hilariously speaks first and inadvertently suggests a motive for the groping claim by Charlotte Edwards. This is Kay at her absolute best, foot firmly stuck right into mouth. We love Kay.
I think we know why she did it. Well, because she had a new column in the Sunday Times, and it was ahead of the...
She had a new... Kay Burley, who's supposed to be objective, who's supposed to be chairing a debate between two people about these claims. Kay sticks hoof right into jaw. This is just quality.
I think we know why she did it. Well, because she had a new column in the Sunday Times. Yeah.
I wonder, is Kay familiar with the term libel? You might want to get used to it there, Kay. Anyway, right. Let's hear Ayesha Hazarika and Alex Dean arguing.
Yes, and it was ahead of the... But that doesn't mean it's not true.
No, but it does mean that...
Sometimes victims come forward after many, many years. Do you negate their experience because it's like because they come out later?
How much longer should we wait? Could it be 50 years for you, Ayesha? And could it be just when someone got a book deal and you wouldn't even put a question mark on it?
Also, now you're saying you're questioning her motive. You're saying she's the bad person.
No, you're saying there's no possible way to... No,
I'm saying I am saying that sometimes people wait before. Sometimes something has happened. It's quite traumatic. It takes a while for them.
20 years, though. It's that traumatic. It takes 20 years to talk about it, does it?
While for them to want to talk about it. That does not negate their lived experience.
You don't think that Kay might have a point and that she's now got a new column?
Yeah, but even if that's the case, doesn't mean that it's not true.
No, that's also the case. At which point one would say...
Feminists must be sticking pins into Kay Burley dolls. I mean, it's also true that she has a column. It's about her column. Yeah.
Contrary to Aisha, there are two sides to every story and both sides deserve to be heard.
Well, he should come out and face the cameras and talk about it.
And then what could he say, Aisha? What could he say, Aisha, that would convince you of anything?
Well, let him come in front of the cameras. I don't think he'll face the cameras.
But he did face the cameras. He spoke to Kate McCann and he said, no, I didn't do it. It wasn't me. Nobody saw me do it. You can't prove anything. That's what he said. He said I didn't do it. What else is he supposed to say? You see, nobody knows whether he did it or whether he didn't do it. He might have done it. I mean, he's not exactly a man in good standing, is he? He's not a man of character, is he? He's not a man of morals. It's the sort of thing a privileged, entitled little prick like him might do. But who could believe it? 20 years later, woman has new column in the Times, looking for a bit of attention. And the timing of it, right in the middle of the Brexit madness and the Tory conference, the timing is amazing. But I'm not saying he didn't do it, of course.
Well,
because we know that there's a huge amount of truth in what she's kind of said.
How?
Honest, you'd never believe it.
How do you know that? How do you know there's a huge amount of truth in what she said? How do you know that? Did you borrow the DeLorean, did you? From Marty McFly, did you, this morning? Did you go back to 1999, did you? Yeah. These people, huh?
Would you?
Well, let's see what he says.
He fucking said no! He said I didn't do it. What more does he gotta say or does he have to say? Were there witnesses to this fumbling? Were there?
See what he says.
Difficult to believe him if he doesn't want to come out and say, I didn't do it.
Jesus Christ, Kay! He said he didn't do it on your fucking programme! What's happened this Monday? Have IQs dropped internationally and nationally overnight? The guy just said a few minutes ago on your programme, I didn't do it. And breathe. Of course, it's distracting and there are more important things to talk about. But that's what they're talking about today. In Manchester. Here's a very serious story, far more important than whether or not Johnson had a few too many brandies at lunch 20 years ago and rubbed the thigh of a female colleague. I'm not saying it's right. I've never groped anybody. And I was never groped either. I'd love to be groped. Nobody gropes me. Far more important, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, wants to make vaccinations compulsory, and children then who would not be vaccinated would not be admitted into school. Yeah, there's no point in me trying to oversell this. I'm not going to emote. I'm not going to wax on about this or wax off about it either. It's shocking, isn't it? We've seen it in Australia, have we? Where else have we seen it? Italy, maybe. Maybe I'm wrong. I know Australia anyway. He's getting legal advice on whether or not they can draft a bill. Yeah. And they're saying that the measles jab has, the uptake of it has decreased somewhat, and that's putting people at risk. And we can't have people at risk. So we have to give serious consideration to making it mandatory for children. Imagine it. Imagine it. Did you ever think, imagine your great-grandparents. Maybe some of you have great-grandparents who are alive, maybe. Maybe your own parents had you when they were very young, maybe. I don't know. Imagine if you said to your great-grandparents that there would be a time in the future when the government would tell you that you must have a vaccine. And of course, it's not going to end with children, because they are claiming that herd immunity, which is complete and utter nonsense, by the way, even for a layman, it's nonsense. They are claiming that one of the reasons we need to mandate the vaccines is for those poor, misfortunate people who can't have a vaccine. So there are people who can't have a vaccine because they've got a medical condition and they would be in danger if they got the vaccine. So God love them. They're not vaccinated, so everybody else needs to get vaccinated so that we can't give them the measles or the flu or whatever else. It's shocking stuff. But it's coming to this country right soon, so it is. We know in Australia, if I remember, they linked it to benefits, didn't they? It is linked to benefits. I believe that those people who depend on state benefits to survive are told if their children don't get the jab, they don't get their benefits. Yeah. All those films, eh? Here's something I came across that you just won't believe. It's by Ian Cobain, nothing to Kurt. He's a journalist for the Middle East Eye. Wait for this for a headline. Exclusive. Twitter executive for Middle East is British Army PSYOPs soldier. You think that's got to be untrue? You think there can't be any truth in that one, Richie? Did you just say a Twitter executive who oversees the Middle East is actually a British Army psychological operations soldier? Well, it's a fact. It is a fact. The man is Gordon McMillan. He's been with Twitter for 6 years. And now he's got editorial responsibility for the Middle East. Senior executive with editorial responsibility for the Middle East. Twitter. Listen to this. I'm not joking. You need to spread this all across social media while you can. This guy, this Twitter exec, is a part-time officer in the British Army Psychological Warfare Unit. Brilliant bit of journalism by Ian Cobain. I followed the links set out by him, and he's absolutely right. What a coincidence, eh? Twitter, which is of course a psychological warfare operation, right? Selling you the establishment narrative and agenda 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is being run, at least in the Middle East, by a guy who works in PSYOPs for the British Army. File that in the "you couldn't fucking make it up" column. Absolutely. Middle East Eye, if you want to find that, I'll get a link to the article and I'll put it out there, and you can then do what you want with it. You can tweet it all around the world or Facebook it all around the world. Marvellous. I mean, do I have to say any more about that? About what's going on with social media and what social media was designed to do from the very beginning? Amazing bit of journalism that. Gordon McMillan, eh? Looking after the Middle East for Twitter, works in the British Army PSYOPs unit. Marvellous. Nothing to see here. What does he say, Leslie? What does he say? Nothing to see here.
Move on. Nothing to see here.
Please disperse.
Please disperse.
Nothing.
Nothing to see here.
Please, it's a coincidence. It doesn't really matter. It has no bearing on what he does for Twitter at all, that he works in PSYOPs for the British Army. Don't worry about it. Got nothing to worry about at all. Jesus wept. Yeah, file that in "you just couldn't make it up" category. The Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, lunatic, has been warning that oil prices may soar if the world doesn't act on Iran. The Saudis, well, they want severe action on Iran. Sanctions is not enough. They want action. He said if the world fails to act, it will embolden Iran, and that would lead to war, and that would ruin the global economy. He gave an interview to CBS 60 Minutes programme. Here's a snippet of that interview. You will hear the interviewer first, the reporter, and then you will hear bin Salman himself.
This attack hit the heart of Saudi Arabia's oil industry. Were you blindsided?
I might disagree with you. This attack didn't hit the heart of the Saudi energy industry, but rather the heart of the global energy industry. It disrupted 5.5% of the world's energy needs, the needs of the US and China and the whole world.
The kingdom is the world's #1 importer of arms, of military equipment. Billions of dollars spent on equipment. How could it not prevent an attack like this?
Well, you see, all of the arms that we get in from your country, love, and from the UK, well, we commit genocide on a daily basis against the people of Yemen. So we were a bit blindsided by this alleged drone attack, you see. That's what happened. So the weaponry we buy from you, we kill thousands of innocent people a week with it, is an answer. Well, one answer anyway.
Saudi Arabia is almost the size of a continent. It is bigger than all of Western Europe. We have 360 degrees of threats. It's challenging to cover all of this fully.
What do you think was the strategic reason that Iran struck Aramco?
I believe it's stupidity. There is no strategic goal. Only a fool would attack 5% of global supplies.
Which is why they didn't do it.
The only strategic goal is to prove that they are stupid, and that is what they did.
Secretary Mike Pompeo has called what Iran did, in his words, an act of war. Was it an act of war?
Of course, yes. If the world does not take a strong and firm action to deter Iran, we will see further escalations that will threaten world interests. Oil supplies will be disrupted, and oil prices will jump to unimaginably high numbers that we haven't seen in our lifetime.
Isn't the CBS reporter the worst thing you've ever heard in your life? Obviously reading pre-agreed questions to this guy, Mohammed bin Salman. A little softball question about arms importation, Disgusting that, isn't it? Masquerading as journalism, you know. I'm not perfect, of course I'm not. I'm far from the best journalist, nothing like it, nothing even nearly like it. But Jesus, I've got a bit of integrity. How can you sit down with somebody like that and not ask him about Yemen, right? How can you not challenge him to provide more than a few bits of debris as proof that Iran did it? How could you just sit there in your little business suit and your perfectly manicured hands and your lovely haircut and not ask him about these things? Crazy, 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 crazy. What are we? We're 24 minutes we are past the hour. This is the Richie Allen Show. Thanks to you for your tweets, by the way. Lovely to hear from you, David Stanford. How you doing, David? Jeffrey Jackson might not be listening to the programme, but he's on Twitter at the moment. I must invite Jeffrey back on. Terrific guy is Jeffrey. He's not been on the programme for quite a long time. Hi to Busy, to Patrick, to Sarosh. How you doing, Sarosh? To Patricia. How you doing, Patricia? To Manrique, to Faisal, to Cartoon Drunk. Yeah. Why didn't Johnson just deny touching her and call her a lying bitch who could prove it one way or another? It was a long time ago, says Cartoon Drunk. Yeah. Mightn't be the best. Mightn't have gone down too well if he called her a lying bitch. Not sure that would have gone down. I wouldn't be recommending that myself if I was his advisor now. Hi to Mwinga as well. How you doing? Mwinga, who says, I wouldn't be surprised if Mohammed bin Salman wrote those questions himself. Richie, I wouldn't be surprised either, mate, to be honest with you. It's time for a tune, so it is. Music from the Mavericks on the Richie Allen Show. It's Monday, September 30th, 2019. Christopher Monckton of Branchley will be on this programme in exactly 2.5 minutes' time. Yeah, music from the Mavericks on the Richie Allen Show. The time is exactly 28 minutes past the hour. Just before we welcome Christopher, I want to play a bit of audio from Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General. He was on the Adam Bolton show, or it's got a name, the show, on Sky News this morning. And Adam Bolton raised the spectre of Boris Johnson ignoring the Benn Act, okay, which says that if he doesn't get a deal with the European Union in mid-October at the summit, he must explicitly then write to the European Union requesting an extension beyond the October 31st deadline. Now, Boris Johnson is in Manchester, and both he and his Chancellor Sajid Javid have said repeatedly that we're leaving with or without a deal, despite the Benn Act, which he has dubbed the Surrender Bill. Very interesting exchange between Adam Bolton and Dominic Grieve, Conservative MP, when Bolton asks him what will happen if Johnson defies the law. We'll have a listen to this, and when we come back from it, we'll say hello to Christopher Monckton. Here's the exchange.
Well, I mean, what happens if we get to the 19th and Boris Johnson says we haven't got a deal, as things stand under Article 50, we're leaving, and I'm certainly not going to request an extension?
He would be taken to court, and a writ of mandamus would be issued against him, and he would be told that he has, as a matter of law, to write the letter. And if the case could go to the Supreme Court, and I suspect the courts could deal with it very quickly.
No, but what happens if he says, OK, put me in prison, I don't care?
Well, it doesn't matter. At that stage, the Cabinet Secretary and the Civil Service refused to work for him. I assume the Attorney General and the Lord Chancellor will have resigned because it is such a flagrant breach of the law.
Well, the Attorney General is one of his leading cheerleaders.
Well, it doesn't matter if he's his leading cheerleader. I think the Attorney General is a good enough lawyer to know that you cannot support a Prime Minister who's breaking the law of the land.
But then, you'd be in this last 10 days before the 50, and you have to somehow put the Prime Minister on trial, get rid of him.
No. There's no question of putting the Prime Minister on trial. It's a question of the court ordering the Prime Minister to do something as a matter of law. The Supreme Court, Her Majesty's judges, telling the Prime Minister that as a matter of law he has to do something.
And he says he's not going to do
well,
it.
He'll be
but
out.
He's not going to resign. What happens then?
Well, he'll be out in 5 minutes.
How?
He'll be dismissed.
By the Queen?
Yes.
So the Queen will come in.
But I think it's a rather hypothetical position. It's hypothetical. If he intends to continue behaving in his completely ludicrous fashion, yes, perhaps.
Yeah, he'll be out in 5 minutes. The Queen will sack him, says Dominic Grieve. My guest this hour needs no introduction to you, so I won't waste time with a long-winded introduction. He's been banging on, and that's not a nice way to put it, but he's been raising the alarm for many years about what membership of the European Union actually means for countries. Let's welcome back to the programme the third Viscount Monckton of Brenchley himself. It's Christopher Monckton. Christopher, welcome back. Hope you're well.
Richard, nice to be with you.
Nice to be with you, sir. Thanks for coming on. I'm not prone to pessimism, but I know, and I've known since the 24th of June 2016, we're never going to leave the European Union. Am I wrong?
Right. Well, here is the way I look at things. I always find that the glass is at least 3/4 full, and so I do in the present instance. If Boris Johnson says he's going to leave the European Union without a deal and yet comply with the rather ludicrous instrument of capitulation, which is the Benn Act, which says he's got to write and beg for more time if he doesn't leave with a deal, then it's very clear what he is going to do, even though he is not yet telling the likes of Dominic Grieve, who you heard bedwetting on a moment ago. What he's going to do is this. He will no doubt be in active talks with the European Economic Area, of which we were one of the founder members, and we had to leave it once we joined the EU. The EU's so-called law takes precedence over the treaty governing the European Economic Area. However, the European Economic Area, which now consists of only 3 countries because all the others have joined the EU, still has full, unrestricted trading rights with the EU, just like the rights that we as EU members have now. However, it isn't in the EU. So if we were to apply very quietly to rejoin the European Economic Area on a temporary basis, then the moment our EU membership expired at 11:30 on the 31st of October, from 11:30 on the 31st of October, for as long as we cared to remain in the European Economic Area, we would then be in the European Economic Area, and we would therefore have no need for any deal with the EU, because we would effectively have got a deal in that the European Economic Area already has one. So what that would mean is we would leave the European Union on the due date and time, and immediately, ipso facto, as the lawyers would have it, in the very doing of the deed, the moment we leave the EU, we simply join the European Economic Area. That means we don't have to worry about no deal, because trading carries on exactly the same as before, the Irish border exactly the same as before. But the crucial difference is that we are then out of the EU, and we are then free to negotiate with the EU from strength rather than from our present parliamentary mandated weakness. Because once we're out of the EU, we can simply then take our time, negotiate in a relaxed fashion a new arrangement with it, while at the same time, under the EEA treaty, being free to negotiate and get ready for freely negotiated arrangements with other countries such as the United States, Australia, Canada, all the places we turned our backs on when we joined the EU. So that is what I think he should be doing, even if he's not actually doing it. If that is what he's doing, then his remarks are entirely consistent with that, because obviously if we don't even need a deal with the EU, then he doesn't need to write a letter to the EU asking for an extension, because we can leave, and yet we've still got the deal, which is already there on the table and would then be part of our arrangements once we join the European Economic Area. So I suspect that or something very close to it is what Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings have in mind. They've all realised, as have we all, this is why the rhetoric from Boris Johnson is the way it is. They've realised that the establishment, practically the entire civil service, about 3/4 of Parliament, are dedicated to denying the electorate what we voted for by the largest vote on any subject in the entire history of these islands. They're determined that we shall not have our way, that they will put every kind of obstacle they can in the way of getting it. But Boris is making it very clear to us by the noises which he is making, and he doesn't make noises without having calculated very carefully the political effect of those noises. What he is doing is saying to the people of Britain, I am the champion who is fighting for you against the establishment, against those members of Parliament who have defied the promises all their parties originally made that they would respect the result of the referendum. I alone am standing clear and proud, and it is the Conservative Party under my leadership which will go into the next election, in whatever the circumstances that next election may be, willing to carry out the wishes of the vast majority. I say the vast majority, a sufficiently large majority, 1.375 million, I think it was, of the British electorate. And that's the message that he's putting across. And the more the likes of Dominic Grieve blub into their handkerchiefs and say, oh dear, but look how terrible it is, he's breaking the law, this, that, and the other. No, he's not going to break the law. He's just going to find a way around it. And the sensible way around it is to join the EEA. Why? Because that completely removes any problems over no deal. And it then exposes Parliament's true motive. Because if Parliament continues to object to leaving the EU, then that objection is no longer based on the question of deal or no deal. It's purely because the establishment wants Britain no longer to govern itself. It wants Britain to be governed by unelected commissars overseas. And what has got lost in the arguments about process over recent weeks, and this is exactly the tactic which, of course, the other side are working on, is they are taking away from people's memories the reasons why it is that we need to leave the EU. And the most basic of all those reasons is that the European Union is not just undemocratic, it is anti-democratic. The sole reason for having a Reichstag in Brussels, having a Duma, a pretend parliament in Brussels, is to make it look as though the European Union, composed as it is of countries that were, until they joined it, democratic, is still a democratic entity, just as there was the Parliament of the Soviet Union. It wasn't a real parliament. It couldn't really bring forward bills that opposed the will of the Communist Party. But they went through the motions because so powerful is the idea of democracy that even the worst of tyrants will pretend that they're Democrats really. But what Boris is doing is making it very, very clear that the Remainers, the Ramonas, the people who wish to keep us imprisoned and enslaved to this hideous oligarchy of the European Union, this oligarchy which I tried with my noble friend Lord Stockton to reform on the European Constitutional Convention. He was a member of it. And every amendment that he put down at my recommendation, saying, let us take away the powers of the commissars to propose legislation and transfer those powers to the elected European Parliament, which at the moment is such a feeble parliament of eunuchs that it is not allowed under the European treaties even so much as to bring forward a bill. And this, of course, is why we want to leave. So it's worth reciting the reasons why we want to leave. We want our democracy back if we could make the European Union democratic, we would, and we'd stay in it. But we tried that, and the commissars vetoed every single proposal we put down to transfer their powers into the hands of the elected European Parliament.
There hasn't been, Christopher.
That. They have only themselves to blame that Britain and many other countries behind us now wish to leave this sullen, greedy, anti-democratic, corrupt from top to bottom European Union that's costing the taxpayers £1 billion sterling every month.
Yeah, we've not had a discussion since the referendum on British television or radio about what the European Union is. It's almost like collectively the media got together. I'm not saying they did, but it's almost like they did and said, right, from now on in we won't have any discussion about how the European Union functions. Let me put something to you. Christopher Monckton is our guest today. I should be objective. I should be a bit more devil's advocate in terms of talking about, you know, where we might end up outside the European Union, but I'm not going to do that today. My listeners know that I've been a Brexiteer, that as an Irishman I would have voted against Nice and Lisbon. I would have been talking about these issues in Ireland as a broadcaster. Let's imagine, first of all, that was excellent analysis of the European Economic Area, by the way. I can't impugn any of that. Everything Christopher said is absolutely bang on the money. Let's pretend that Boris Johnson is a committed Brexiteer. I'm not sure he is. Let's pretend he is. Let's pretend he's serious about the way he wants to proceed and go forward. I'd like you to comment for a minute on the Supreme Court decision last week under Lady Hale, which Peter Hitchens wrote a terrifically researched article about in the Mail yesterday. Peter Hitchens, and which nobody else seems to want to talk about. It was an earthquake moment, that decision made by that Supreme Court, Christopher, because it's basically overturned centuries of procedure and legislation and law in this country. And it basically, and I can't be in any way objective, I've got to call it as it is. It's basically a kind of an unashamed, unapologetic, he said it himself, Hitchens, power grab by the Supreme Court. What did you make of that decision last week? How important is it for people to understand what happened? And is that the reason why we're not hearing about it?
We have to go back 3 years to their decision in the original case brought by that silly woman, Gina Miller, who is determined not to let the British people have their way. And that was 3 years ago. She went to, first of all, the Administrative Court on judicial review of Theresa May's proposal to send to the European Union the letter announcing that we were leaving the European Union because, in accordance with our constitutional arrangements, namely the referendum, we had decided we were leaving. And she objected to that on the ground that that letter would cause a change in British legislation, and you aren't allowed to use the royal prerogative without the permission of Parliament if it has the effect of changing legislation. Now, none of the courts asked the right question, and the government, whose law officers at that time under Theresa May were doing their level best to keep us in the EU while pretending that Brexit meant Brexit, they did not put forward in that original case the one argument that would have stopped the Supreme Court from getting the ambitions it now has to govern us without being elected. And that was, all they had to say was, no, this isn't the exercise of the royal prerogative to send that letter telling the EU we're leaving. It is the fulfillment of a treaty obligation under Article 50, Sub-Article 2 of the Lisbon Treaty, one of the treaties by which we are bound. And therefore, the royal prerogative doesn't come into it because the royal prerogative is a purely discretionary power that the government may or may not exercise as it pleases. There is no discretion in this matter. We have decided to leave, and therefore we are obliged by the treaty to tell them. Now, the government, that was the obvious argument that should have been used.
Why wasn't it?
The government failed at every stage in those proceedings, in the Administrative Court, the Appeal Court, and the so-called Supreme Court, to argue that case. The judges, of course, longing to grab power for themselves, didn't argue it either. And when I wrote to the Supreme Court a single-page statement saying, this is the law, it is the law of the land, the Lisbon Treaty. We have to send that letter. This is not an exercise of the royal prerogative. It is the fulfillment of an obligation under a treaty by which we are bound. The government can do no other, just like Luther. It has to do it. It was a one-page explanation of this very simple legal point. And what happened? Notwithstanding the ancient right of any citizen to be heard by a court under the power of oyer and terminer that goes back to Section 1 of the Justices of the Peace Act 1361. The court refused even to look at my one-page statement because it knew perfectly well that if it did, it would have to stand back and let Mrs. May send that letter. So the court has been playing it dirty, as have government ministers and as has the law office of the Crown throughout this process ever since we voted for Brexit. Now, in the present case, yet again, the blame is not only on the Supreme Court, so-called, but also on the government for failing to argue the right point.
Why?
The government fatuously argued that the Supreme Court was not allowed to review the actions of ministers. Well, of course, it is settled law that the entire process of judicial review, which goes back to the courts of equity in the 14th century, to redress the balance of power between the citizen and the overmighty state. Of course, the courts have the power to review the actions of individual ministers. They can't review the actions of Parliament. That's another matter. But ministers, they can. So the government argued the case on the wrong basis. What it should have said is that the application for a prorogation of Parliament, which happens at the end, usually annually, of every parliamentary session, is a normal procedure, and the only difference between this and all previous prorogations is that this one would reduce the time that Parliament would have to sit and discuss Brexit by precisely 3 sitting days. It was purely a matter of administrative convenience to allow the party conferences to happen and nothing else.
And the Supreme Court, Christopher, can I come back in? I think
there's a very good chance the court would have stood away and said, OK, it's a fair cop. But the court commented, in my view, rightly, on the failure of the government to deal with the substance of the matter instead of arguing about the law where it was simply wrong.
The government was dreadful, Christopher.
In the first instance got it wrong. In the second instance, in the absence of any properly argued case from the government, I'm afraid I might well have come to the same conclusion.
Well, hang on a second. The government didn't fight its own corner at all. It didn't put forward...
That's the problem.
This is right. It didn't put anybody forward to make these arguments, and this was a number of legal analysts on the BBC and Sky were absolutely dumbfounded that the government didn't do this. And this is where I get conspiratorial. I love a good conspiracy theory, as you well know, my friend, because it's a stitch up. Because nobody is committed to leaving the European Union, apart from the 17.4 million people who voted to leave, people like yourself and others. Nobody, not Boris Johnson. Johnson is as much of a flip-flopper as the inveterate, useless Jeremy Corbyn. Corbyn is as much, deep down, as much of a Brexit-ear or a Eurosceptic as you or as me, but he's a hypocrite, he's a liar. For political ambitions, he's doing what he's doing. I would argue that Johnson is right and that David Cameron, for all the faults of Cameron, characterised him brilliantly. Johnson saw a career move and threw his weight behind Brexit. He's not committed to it either. You look at that dreadful showing around the Supreme Court hearings over the 5 days. Nothing from the government whatsoever. It's a stitch-up, Christopher. It's an establishment stitch-up everywhere.
I think, putting it this way, the Supreme Court was wrong the first time round. But I've read the judgment, and the second time round, I'm afraid it could get away with what it did, because in the end, the courts have to argue with the material that is put in front of them. And if there was no material put in front of them to explain why Boris decided to recommend that to the Queen, then the government is very much to blame for that. And I agree with you. It does smell more than a little that they failed to argue their case in a proper fashion. So where does this leave us? Well, interestingly, the Supreme Court did something which is, as far as I can discover, entirely unprecedented. It overthrew a royal proclamation. What it should have said, in my view, having come to the view that the advice to the Queen was wrong, it should have ordered the Prime Minister to go back to the Queen and apply for the prorogation to be set aside by another order in council. That wasn't done. And so what I think is, for the first time ever in British history, a decision taken by the monarch, having followed the due constitutional procedure, has been set aside by the court. And I don't think the courts can do that. So I suspect that the sitting of Parliament at the moment is probably, for that reason, illegal.
Yeah, they invented a law out of thin air, didn't they? This is the thing. I try and explain this sometimes.
No. They didn't invent a law out of thin air. They didn't deal in their judgment with the question of whether or not the Queen should be approached to set aside the Order in Council that she made. You see, there's no suggestion that she made the Order in Council invalidly. The advice to her to do so was wrong, but she acted correctly on the advice of her Prime Minister, as a constitutional monarch must. No doubt she may have raised an eyebrow or two and made some harumphing noises, but she will in the end have gone with the advice of her ministers. That's what a constitutional monarch has to do.
Yeah.
But it is not for the courts, however grand they may think they are, however supreme they may think they are not supreme over the monarch. And what they should have said is that Boris must go back to the monarch and ask for the prorogation to be set aside by another Order in Council. They didn't do that, and I suspect that the true legal position at the moment is that Parliament is not in fact entitled to be sitting at the moment, and therefore any decisions that it comes to that we don't like, we could go to the courts and say, nope, they shouldn't be sitting. They're sitting contrary to a royal proclamation which has not been set aside. The court has set aside Boris's advice to the Queen and has said wrongly that therefore the prorogation was of no effect. No, the prorogation was effective because the Queen issued the proclamation. Otherwise, what's the point of having the Queen at all? Therefore, the Parliament must go, or rather the government must go back to the Queen and get permission. And I have not yet seen any evidence that the government has done that. And therefore, all legislation or attempts at interfering with Brexit that are now undertaken by Parliament in this period until the 14th of October will be ipso facto illegal.
Well, you know,
so that'll complicate matters for the remainder.
I know it's difficult. I want to leave because we've got about 8 minutes left, and I want to talk about climate change in the 8 minutes we have left. Yeah. I would argue that they have invented a law out of nothing, and I'm going to use Lord Sumption as my legal advisor. Sumption said that by setting aside that advice that Johnson gave the Queen, they've basically handed themselves the power out of nothing. To do that forevermore, and not just do that, do more than that. But that being said, I hear you. I'm just putting Lord Sumption's side of things.
He's making my point, but in a different way.
Yeah.
What he is saying is that if they were going to do that, they should have used the correct procedure, which is to get the Queen to reverse the prorogation. Nobody else can do that. Only the Queen can. It's her power. And the courts have no power to order the Queen to do that. They can order ministers to go back and advise her to do that, and she will then act in accordance with their advice. What they can't do is simply to say, because they don't like the advice that he gave to her, therefore the prorogation was of no effect. That is what Lord Sumption is saying, and I'm making the same point.
Right, okay. Yeah, okay, look, with the semantics, I still think they've given themselves, and not for the first time. It's an excellent article by Hitchens. People should read it on dailymail.co.uk, giving themselves powers to do things that they previously didn't have the power to do. But anyway, important stuff that. Let's see how this plays out in the next few weeks. I wanted to talk to you in the few minutes we have left up to the top of the hour. I've been surprised at what we've seen in 2019. More and more hysteria from celebrities, from politicians, from children, telling us that we're at the point of no return, dreaming up visions of apocalyptic weather events in the next few years that, you know, is ultimately going to seal humanity's fate. Crazy stuff. Some people, I saw a report on RT the other day where a journalist made a very good point. He said it's all very evangelical. It's all very kind of cult-ish in the way that it's kind of playing out. But there's no resistance to it. We spoke briefly today before the programme. We know, you and I, that the UK media, Sky and the BBC, have both said the argument is settled now. No need to get balance anymore. Climate change is real. Man-made CO2 is going to kill us all. Therefore, we don't need to get any balance. We've seen Extinction Rebellion cause chaos, economic chaos for people in Manchester and London. This has been some crazy year, Christopher, hasn't it? It's almost like this agenda to convince the world that not only is CO2 causing climate change, but we need to change everything that we do, turn our whole lives upside down. It seems that it's gathered pace in the last 6 to 8 months.
Well, I think what has happened is they've begun to realise that, scientifically speaking, there is no longer any fig leaf. Anyone who now looks at the science, particularly science, recent science I'm going to talk to you about in a moment, realises that there is no longer any scientific case for alarm about global warming at all. And here is what's just been published. This is a peer-reviewed paper published after it had been rejected 13 times. And it was only eventually published after two of the most eminent climatologists on the other side of the debate read that paper and said, actually, little though we like to say it, this is correct. And that is a paper by my good friend, Professor Pat Frank, who is at the Stanford Linear Accelerator. And they don't suffer fools gladly there. And he has been, and I heard him lecture on this at the World Federation of Scientists at Erice in Sicily a few years ago. And he was howled down by the assembled true believers there. But he stood his ground and he said, no, the propagation of error or uncertainty in the models is such that they are no better than guesswork. He said they can tell us nothing whatsoever about how much global warming we may cause. And yet the entire case for all this panic about global warming is based on the outputs of those models, which are now proven in a published peer-reviewed paper, which has not so far been refuted, to be completely worthless. So that is now a peer-reviewed result. It's there, it's in the journals, he fought his way through. Nobody in the end could find any fault with his analysis. It's actually quite a simple analysis. It's a well-established field in statistics, error propagation. It's very well understood, the mathematics of the root mean squared error. I won't go into the detail of that, but they're well known, they're well understood. You can do it on a pocket calculator if you want, and you can see perfectly well, provided you look at the huge uncertainties that exist in the models, that if you propagate those on an annual basis, the result is that they'll predict any number that the modelers care to tell them to predict. So the models are valueless, and therefore there is no case for alarm about global warming. But I have also some news about our own paper, which has also undergone, I think, 1, 2, possibly 3 rejections now by learned journals. It's now been accepted by one of the top 10 journals for peer review. They had a good look at it before they would accept it, because it is saying that climatologists made 2 enormous mistakes when working out how much warming we may cause. At one vital point in their calculations, they forgot to take account of the fact that the sun is shining. And at another point in their calculations, they assumed incorrectly, as you may think, that the Earth is flat. So who are the flat earthers now? And we have identified these errors, we've explained them, we've quantified the effect they have on working out how much global warming we may cause, and it is now certain, in our view, that global warming of more than about 1.8 Celsius per doubling of CO2, which is well below half the current mid-range estimate of 4 Celsius per doubling CO2. The absolute most you could get, and even that would be most unlikely, is 1.8 Celsius. More likely, somewhere between 1 and 1.5. And we think that they're going to have to publish this paper of ours, because there is nothing wrong with it. We've had it very widely read by experts in all the relevant disciplines, and we have several experts in those disciplines among our co-authors. And this is going to take the world by storm. You add that to Pat Frank's paper. You add it to the recent realization by William Nordhaus, who has got the Nobel Prize for his work on climate economics, that actually it isn't worth doing anything much about global warming, even if it is going to be as bad as they say, which it isn't.
It's not.
And there is no longer any rational case for doing anything about global warming except sitting back, enjoying the sunshine, and having the courage to do nothing.
Let me ask you this, Christopher. It's not bad science, is it? I spoke to you today about some of the people I've had on. I've had Piers Corbyn on. I've had other scientists as well over the years. But again, I'm putting the tinfoil hat on here, Chris. I don't believe it's bad science, because as you pointed out to me today, and I'm a layman, You've done the research into this. I haven't. I've looked at the notes. I've cross-referenced them. It's easy to do that. And I can see that it's junk science. So I cannot believe that it is just poor decision-making by the men and women of academia around the world. It's got to be more sinister than that. It must be.
Well, I mean, Richie, your default position is that it's all a plot. And a lot of the time it may even be right.
Yeah.
But the question here is, we know that there are about 24 communists well-placed in academia who are pushing this and have been from the start. They're beginning to die off one by one now, and they're not, on the whole, being replaced by others because there is a growing realization that this isn't going to fly. When last year, when the first version of our paper went for peer review, one of the reviewers, in a flagrant breach of the usual rules about this, circulated the paper very widely at the University of East Anglia, where it came into the hands of the Vice-Chancellor, who, on realizing that a very basic mistake of science has indeed been made, called his entire environmental sciences faculty together, all 65 of them, and yelled at them so loudly that it could be heard from outside the door, apparently, yelled at them, "This paper by Monckton and his colleagues is a catastrophe for this university. You must drop everything and find ways of refuting it." And he was so insistent that they stopped teaching their postgraduate students, who then went on strike because they were no longer getting the teaching they'd been paid for, because all the boffins were busy trying to find a way of arguing that they hadn't made the mistake that our paper points out that they had made. Well, they have failed in that endeavour, which is why we are now proceeding through peer review. I think we're very likely to succeed this time. And if we do, then that will be the end of the climate scam, because this is an acutely embarrassing pair of mistakes. I mean, can you imagine how serious it is to assume that the Earth is flat in your calculations?
Yeah.
But that is exactly what they've done. We can prove it. We can prove it in paper after paper after paper, where the unwitting climatologists who know very little physics, in my experience, have used an equation which in such a way that it's absolutely clear they are assuming the Earth is flat and then saying, oh my God, we've assumed the Earth is flat. We'd better divide by 4 so as to allow for the ratio of the surface area of a sphere to the surface area of the Earth's great circle.
Which is
fraud.
That's
how clunky and clumsy.
No, it's fraud. It's fraud. Call it what it is. It's fraud. That's why I say it's an agenda.
The extraordinary thing is they've actually published quite openly what equation they've used and how they've used it. And a fraud is something that's done in secret. This is being done openly. And I think it's genuinely because climatologists just don't know enough physics. I keep coming across this. The most elementary concept. If you hit them with a phrase like Hölder's inequalities between integrals, which is what they failed to take into account in treating the Earth as flat, they don't know what the hell Hölder's inequalities between integrals are. They have no knowledge of mathematics, no real knowledge of physics. There are one or two who do. I mean, people like, for instance, the great Professor Richard Lindzen. They know more mathematics and more physics than I will ever know. They are very, very learned. But those who really know their stuff do not believe that global warming is a problem. Professor Lindzen.
Hey, Christopher, thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate your time. It's going to be a very, very fascinating next few weeks with our departure from the European Union, which I'm convinced is not going to happen.
Well, you heard it here first. All he has to do is join the EEA and go back to Parliament and say, I've joined the EEA from the moment we leave the EU. That sorts out the no-deal problem. I assume, therefore, that you do not wish to proceed with the bill. I don't need to write to the EU asking for an extension. Then he puts the onus straight on the Remainers to explain their real reasons for not wanting to leave the EU without a deal. Their real reason is they don't want to leave the EU at all. So that, if I were he, is what I would do.
It's going to be a fascinating few weeks. Thanks for your time today, Christopher. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your Monday evening. That was Christopher Monckton live on the line from his home today, talking about Brexit and, of course, climate change. Fascinating stuff, this. It's coming up for 4 minutes past the hour. This is the Richie Allen Show. I do want to get some news headlines in. Alison Chabloz is going to join the programme in a few minutes' time as well, by the way. It's Monday, September 30th, 2019. I am Richie Allen. This is your Richie Allen Show. Over to FSN in London for some headlines.
From Feature Story News in London, I'm Ollie Barrett. Militant group Al-Shabaab's claimed responsibility for an attack at a training base in Somalia. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed Mohammed bin Salman says oil prices will soar if the world doesn't take action to deter Iran. France is holding a national day of mourning for President Jacques Chirac, who passed away on Thursday at the age of 86. And a court case is opened in Germany, pitting 450,000 VW owners against the carmaker over its rigging of diesel emissions.
Thanks very much, Ollie. Appreciate that. Thank you for your comments, by the way. Hi to Susan. How you doing, Susan? And to Busy. I've retweeted your videos there. Hi to Paul Paranoid as well. Hiya, Paul. Hope you're well. To William Henderson, to Steve James, who's listening to the programme. To Jackie in Oz. How you doing, Jackie? I remember last year Jackie sent me a message telling me that her daughter-in-law forbade her, Jackie, to be around for the birth of her new grandson in Perth because Jackie wouldn't agree to have the whooping cough vaccine. Even though Jackie promised that she would be a no-show, even if she had a symptom, if any of the symptoms were there. The Oz government sucks, says Jackie. That's right. Daughter-in-law said, listen, Gran, you can't be at the birth unless you have the whooping cough vaccine. This caused a little bit of, I suppose a little bit of disquiet amongst Jackie and the in-laws. But there you go. That's where we're going in the UK. Big story overnight. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, is saying that he's getting legal advice on mandating vaccines for children in the UK. Yes, that's right. Making it compulsory, don't you know? Alrighty. Back then in about 2 minutes' time with Alison Chabloz. You don't want to miss that. Can't wait to catch up with Alison Chabloz. Free speech, freedom of thought. We'll be talking about that with Alison in a few minutes' time. Don't go away.
The Richie Allen Show relies on your support. Go to richieallen.co.uk and set up a monthly donation today.
Renowned healer Mark Byersky travels the world to find the most unique and powerful crystals for self-healing. Since the ancient times, crystals have been used as healing tools. They hold a natural healing vibration and are highly charged in positive energy. Mark teaches how to channel the universal energy and transfer it to the crystal to activate its healing power. Each crystal is used for its unique ability to target a different physical or emotional challenge. Mark Byersky is an author, healer, speaker, and founder of the Pure Energy Healing Academy. He shares powerful messages of inspiration and healing on his daily YouTube videos, reaching millions worldwide. Mark's crystals, healing oils, and incense sticks are most sought after by other healers. His collection is available online at www.markbyersky.com. His work is presented through Lemon House, a company that creates and curates consciously made gifts.
Right, music from Hendrix. Then when we come back, Alison Chabloz. You don't want to miss this. Back in 2. Jimi Hendrix, Hey Joe on the Richie Allen Show. It's 10 minutes past 6, so it is September 30th, 10 past 6. If you've got to be there, you've probably still got time. Take the programme with you. We're on TuneIn Radio, of course, the TuneIn app. We're on Fab Radio, Trigger Warning, the Trigger Warning app. We're everywhere. Well, we're not really. This is important, this. My guest this hour is has been on the programme before. And, you know, she was convicted last year of sending, officially, this is what they convicted her of, an offensive, indecent or menacing message through a public communications network. It was about songs that she wrote and performed, satirical songs about the Holocaust and Anne Frank and other things that people were offended by. Now, she was given a suspended jail sentence by magistrates back then. She did appeal against that and lost that appeal. But last week she was ordered back to court because it was claimed that she'd breached the terms of her probation. Basically, she was accused of using social media, which was defying, they said, the terms of her sentence. But she wasn't using social media. She was blogging on her website, and she had disabled comments on the articles that she put on her website. And she'd obviously been complying with the terms. But strangely, that probationary term would have expired in June of this year anyway. Now, amazingly, last week, she was sent to prison for 8 weeks. I talked about this on the newspaper review show and on the radio show. Incredible decision. But she's not in prison. Thankfully, she's here with us. Let's welcome back to the programme Alison Chabloz. I should give you a proper title, Alison, musician and comedienne. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Thanks, Richie. It's great to be here. I'm very well. I'm happy to be here, to be able to say hello to everybody. And yes, I'm not in prison. They might put me back in prison because I'm going to appeal this sentence. So it could well be that I go back to prison for 3 weeks, perhaps in November or at a later date. And my main case is being appealed this time via a judicial review. And that will take place on the 31st of October. They choose their dates wisely, do they not? I'm not sure where that will be. The High Court in London somewhere. Yes, that's a judicial review.
Educate us about a judicial review. What does that mean? It sounds to me like it means a bunch of learned legal scholars get together and look at a case. Is that what it is?
Yes. It was decided that we must do that because already I appealed. You mentioned in the introduction that I appealed to the Crown Court. That was basically a retrial. And that was clear it took 3 days. That was clear from the very first day that the judge was not on our side. Therefore, the sentence and conviction were upheld. There was no change. They didn't send me to prison back then. It was basically, Holocaust denial isn't a crime in the UK. Anti-Semitism isn't a crime in the UK. But Alison Chabloz's songs, blah, 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 were grossly offensive. She's mad. It was defamation. And he knew, this judge back then, Christopher Hehir is his name. He knew that there would be a further appeal because we still have the right to argue the points of law. But the Crown Court is not in a position to argue some of these points of law. It needs to go to the High Court. Divisional Court is a division of the High Court that deals with administrative points of law, because there is still this sending and the public communications network. And this judge said during the appeal, yes, it's not within my pay grade to discuss these points of law. But then, just as we'd sent off all the forms for the next round of appeal, which should have been at the divisional court, this judge he decided to change his mind and gave a 4-line ruling saying, my judgment was well reasoned, therefore I suggest that the client must now the appellant, as they call them, call those appealing, the appellant must now go for judicial review. So in fact, this is a civil case, and I am bringing a judicial review against the Crown because we still believe that they are wrong in law. They're saying that the act of sending these songs via the internet, or causing to be sent these songs via the internet, because there are 2 different clauses under the section 127, and I was done for 2 songs for causing to be sent because it was a third person who'd originally uploaded those songs to YouTube, and for directly sending the third song because it was me who'd uploaded to YouTube. So that I have to be guilty of something in those acts, and basically the prosecution's argument is that by doing these acts, I was deliberately wishing to grossly offend Jews.
Were you though?
We are still.
Let me ask you this: we've got loads of time. I'm really interested in the judicial review because this will be the first time that some of my listeners will have heard you. I'm sure many of them know of the case because it's such a very unique case, your case. And I don't want to cover too much old ground. I could waste time. I suppose I could be accused of virtue signalling by explaining or telling my audience that, I don't agree with your positions on the Holocaust and on Auschwitz. I could waste time doing that, but I won't do that. It's not about me or me virtue signalling. And I want to talk a little bit later on in the hour about this really disturbing trend that we see emerging in recent years, where people want people like me and others to hate people like Alison Chabloz. They want us to see her as some hateful, repugnant, dirty, grubby, untenable, untouchable person. because she has an opinion that has been deemed to be unsayable, or or even unspeakable. And I want to talk about that later on, because I'm not going to live in a world like that. I don't despise people or see them as dirty or grubby because they have a different point of view than I do. And we'll get into that, and we'll get into more about the people bringing these cases, this charity, the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, which I've invited on this programme 100 times to debate me politely, promised them respect and cordial atmosphere loads of time, and they keep turning me down. And usually they tell a pack of lies when they turn me down about my own opinions. Gaslighting, some people call it. Put this to bed for me, Alison. Alison Chabloz was our guest. When you wrote the songs, did you want to wind up people? Did you want to cause offence to people? Did you want to really wind up Jews, as they have claimed was your motivation?
No, I didn't. When I was first arrested, and it's 3 years, this legal process has been going on now for almost 3 years.
Yeah.
I was first arrested in 2016, and I was interviewed by a policeman who'd obviously been given a list of questions to ask me, and he's one of the questions was, why did you write these songs? And just for the listeners, I got to where I am today because I supported the rights of the Palestinians in Israel and outside of Israel, refugees, Palestinians, to have the right to return to their ancestral homelands. And I was a staunch critic of Israel and its genocidal policies against the Palestinians. And this campaigning of mine on social media, mainly on Twitter, I would say, attracted quite a lot of negative attention from the pro-Israel, very pro-Zionist lobby, which eventually led to the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism becoming aware of my work. I lost a job in 2014. I was on a cruise ship. I lost a job because of one tweet. Satire is kind of my business. I'd mocked a British woman who'd claimed that that Muslims were all terrorists because the Jews or the Christians and the Jews who wanted to go to a nativity play in Israel that needed a gas mask. Therefore, the Muslims, Palestinians must all be terrorists. And I mocked her for this attitude.
Right.
And I was sacked from my job for this one tweet. And then a couple of years later, I was going back to the Edinburgh Fringe for about the 5th time to do a show with these songs. And as soon as the opposition got wind that I was doing a show, as soon as these lobbying groups got wind of it, they managed to have my Edinburgh Fringe show pulled for being too political. So since then, I've just been too fringe for the fringe. I think we probably did a show, Richie, about all that.
We talked about that, yeah.
And I told the officer who was interviewing me all these stories, and he said, yes, but why did you write? I really don't know. I said, it was like a gift from God, especially the song Survivors. That was the 5th song that I'd written in this series, and that was the song that they originally, the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, tried to prosecute me privately for that. And then the Crown Prosecution Service took
it over. That's very
important. With the lobbying, arm twisting and lobbying. They eventually, after about 4 months, took over with this other video that somebody else had uploaded of my songs that included Survivors, and that had been uploaded in England. So they got me on 2 songs in that show, in that Edinburgh Fringe show.
It's important to just rubber stamp that. I should have mentioned this. The CPS, the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions, they had no interest in prosecuting Alison for the songs. It was extensive lobbying, as far as I understand, by a charity called the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism that led to them picking the case up. Let me just say this to you, and I'm not having a go at you. I don't care. I mean, you've seen the stuff that's been put in the national press about this programme. I find you genial. I like you. I like you, right? I don't agree with you, but I like you. And I would never prosecute anybody for writing songs that cause offence, even if you meant to cause offence. That's not the point I'm making. The point I was going to make was, if I was an independent magistrate sitting in judgment of you, and I could never be in judgment of anybody, me, but if I was, I'd be saying, Miss Chabloz, right, okay, you say you didn't want to cause offence with the songs, but you're obviously a smart woman and a talented woman. You know that if you're, throwing doubt on whether the Holocaust happened, if you're saying that one of the concentration camps was a fun park, you're not stupid. You know that that's going to be grievously hurtful to some people. Now, again, I'm not saying for a minute, I stand by everything I've ever said. Nobody should be prosecuted for causing offence. However offensive somebody might think it is, what you sang or what you didn't sing, I'm not having that. I would stand up for your right there of free speech and free thought. But I'd also say, come on, you're not stupid. You know that singing that stuff is going to hurt people. I was thinking of Norm Finkelstein today, somebody you'll have a lot of time for, I would imagine. I've known Norm for years. He's a guest on this programme. And he'd share your opinions about Palestine. But Norm had an aunt, and I think his mum were in Auschwitz. I wonder what Norm would think about the songs. Look, you might say, what fucking point are you trying to make here, Richie? The point I'm making is, it's a bit facetious, maybe, for you to say, I didn't mean to cause offence by the songs. You must have known it was going to hurt some people.
Well,
does it matter? Does that matter?
Why are they hurt? That's the question. And I'm not sure about this. I know that Nick Kolostrom has described Auschwitz as a theme park, and so have plenty of others. I'm far from being the first person to do that. And I even suspect that Dr. Finkelstein might have said similar things.
No, he didn't. I'll tell you what he said. He wrote a book called The Holocaust Industry, which I've read several times, and I would agree with the central thesis of the book completely, that political capital and emotional capital has been drawn from the plight of Jews in Nazi Germany to allow the illegitimate state of Israel do the things that you described it doing earlier on. But Norm wouldn't be saying that people didn't die in Auschwitz. And I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm not saying you said that either. And you mentioned Nick, and I've had Nick on the programme talking about the terror attacks in London. He's done great work on that, and he's come on to talk about these things. And I don't agree with Nick either. But again, I agree with his right of free speech. The point I'm making is, and look, again, I agree with the central premise that people should have the rights to sing about, as long as they're not inciting violence, which you've never done, they should have the rights to sing and write about whatever they want. I'm just saying, you might say, why are you saying it? Well, because, I would know one or two people who've had grandparents in ghettos, and they might go, Jesus Christ, Alison, that's going to wind people up. It's just because I asked you, did you deliberately set out to wind people up, and you said you didn't. I'm saying, but you knew there was going to be a reaction, because you're smart, right?
Well, I think the point is that, that Jews themselves are, from the moment they're born, and probably even before, they are indoctrinated into this mentality that they are victims of Nazism, whatever, fascism, that they are victims, they're always being persecuted, that anti-Semitism is the oldest crime, and they are indoctrinated, and that they are indoctrinated into believing that they were, during the war, that there were 6 million Jews who were killed industrially. A great number of these Jews were killed in industrial fashion in gas chambers in Auschwitz and elsewhere. They are indoctrinated from a very young age to believe this, and to believe that they are persecuted uniquely because they are Jews, and because of their ethnicity, because of their religion, because of their ethnicities. Jews have this double, it's a double-edged. As Jews, they are defined not only by the religion but also by ethnicity, therefore by race, we can say, and the problem with this is, as a revisionist and seeing the liberties that have been taken away in countries like Germany and France of academics and of researchers and indeed of artists. I'm thinking of Dieudonné, the French comedian who was a great influence on me, and the fact that people like Ursula Haverbeck at the age of 92 is wasting in a German prison along with Alfred Schäfer, along with Horst Mahler. That
it's outrageous.
My mission in this is for love and truth, and the Jews need to free themselves from this indoctrination. It's being used. It's being used, the Holocaust narrative, to implement the globalist agenda. That's my basic philosophy, and the globalist agenda. And it's not. I don't think it's a Jewish agenda. I think Jews are victims of Zionism, in the same way that non-Jews are victims of Zionism. But the fact that the Jews over the centuries have been very successful, we know that that the influence that they have over our governments, over our media, over Hollywood, over the banking and financial industry, it's certainly not all Jews, but there are a great many powerful countries, the Rothschilds, etc., that they do what is good for Zionism and international Zionism, for Israel and for the diaspora international Zionism. They act in a tribal way for their own interests. They do that. They live this is Heidegger, they live according to the longest time, according to the principle of race. They look after their own people. And at the same time, they prevent all the other groups from doing the same. Hence, we have these race laws, hate speech laws. And if you go back in the history of how these race laws came about, it's always the Jewish lobby who are behind it. Some civil servant will be behind it, and then suddenly, when he's freed from his duties, he will become a deputy in the Board of Deputies.
Let me jump in there for a minute. Let me jump in.
Typical behaviour, I'm afraid, and it's not all.
Well, it's
Jews.
not typical of Jews. I wouldn't say it's typical of Jews. Let me jump in. It's 28 minutes past the hour, 29 minutes past the hour. Alison Chabloz back on the programme. Good to have Alison back on. Was returned to court last week. It was claimed that she was in breach of her probation, which it wasn't. I've looked at it. She wasn't in breach of the terms of her probation. And she was ordered back to prison for 8 weeks. Thankfully, she isn't there. Now she's here. She's at home. Alison was convicted of sending a menacing message through a public communications network last year because of satirical songs about the Holocaust and Anne Frank. Let me go back to something you said a few minutes ago. Because when you talk about Jewish men and women, and I don't imagine it's happening in every Jewish household, but I know it's happening I know this because I hear from Jews. I know Jewish folks, and some of the Jews I know, I suppose these days they happen to be the wrong Jews to know, because when you go and quote them or you attribute a quotation to them, you get the pro-Zionist lobby in the UK coming down on it, calling themselves hating Jews and that sort of stuff. I think you make a good point about, well, I know this goes on in Israel anyway, that you have Jews brought up to believe that they are in, maybe I can say, mortal danger, that because they are Jews, that they are subject to a very special, a very unique targeting by racists who would blame them for everything and who would kill them. Now, I don't believe that's true. I've said it 1,000 times on my radio programme. I don't believe there's any rise in anti-Jewish sentiment in the UK or in Ireland or anywhere else. It's a nonsense. And those who claim that there is a rise in anti-Jewish feeling are lying, or they're gravely mistaken. I don't know which it is. I suspect some of them are lying, and I suspect others are just gravely mistaken. There is no rise in antipathy towards Jewish people, whom I see as white people who believe in a fairy godfather in the sky. I think you make a good point about that. But your critics might say, well, why not explore that then? Why not keep bringing it back to 6 million didn't die, or this didn't happen in Auschwitz? Because you just lose that central I don't know, field of interest, field of study about what, the narrative that exists now, that Jews are scapegoated now, they are under attack now, when there isn't any evidence of that. Your critics will say, you keep going back to arguments about what didn't happen in Nazi Germany. Why don't we just agree? I don't mean you and me now, Alison. I mean, why don't we just agree that, along with other people, Jews were scapegoated and blamed in Nazi Germany for the situation the country found itself in. And they were locked up and they were killed in numbers, whether it was 6 million or 5 million. Why do you not move away from that and talk about what, and I'm not telling you what you can and what you can't talk about, but the point you made about the narrative existing today that you're special if you're born Jewish, you are, the minute you're born, you're under some sort of gun, that internationally people are coming after you. Now, Finkelstein has talked a lot about this, and I agree with him. You keep going back to arguments about Nazi Germany, and you know damn well you're going to lose 99% of your audience before you even get going. What do you think?
What did I talk about? Nazi Germany. There's no doubt, that under the current definition of genocide, as described by the UN, the official UN policy of genocide, deportation, ethnic cleansing, even if no one's killed, it's a form of genocide. Yeah. It was a war. There was a war going on, and one can discuss the crimes of the National Socialist, the Third Reich, but I don't think that I've done that. I would say that the rise of anti-Semitism, I would disagree with that, at least to some extent. I don't think that I don't think that there is a genuine dislike of anybody amongst the British people. I really don't think there are.
I agree with you. I agree with you on that point. Yeah.
But my case, Richie, has drawn attention to the way that the Jewish lobby has behaved.
Yeah.
They tried to make an example of me. They didn't realize that it was like the Streisand effect in a way. Barbara Streisand, whenever it was a decade ago, somebody put an aerial photo of her Malibu clifftop mansion on the internet, and she seized a lawyer and tried to get that photo removed, but it had the opposite effect. They gave me so much free publicity with these songs. And according to these associations campaigning against anti-Semitism, my songs are inciting hatred against Jews, and they're inciting people to hate Jews.
That's a nonsense. That's a nonsense. I agree with you.
I can't see how that... Stephen Silverman of Campaign Against Anti-Semitism tweeted that the day I was sent to prison, or when I was released the other day. Somebody sent me a tweet that's what he's saying, that I in my songs, my videos incite people to hate Jews.
Nonsense.
Now, I would say that it's rather the behavior of these associations who, let's be honest, they profit. They make financial gain from the suffering of their people who were deported, some of whom died, a lot of others didn't die, and we still got survivors still alive. They profit from their war debt.
Well, hang on a second now. Hang on, let me jump in. Hang on. You'll get plenty of time to talk now, as you know you will. Hang on a second. I have no time for them at all, or anybody like them. It's not just them specifically. I agree with you. Some of the behaviour of some of the people associated with them is utterly reprehensible. I agree with you. I'm on your side. You shouldn't be jailed. You shouldn't be banned. I have no time for any of that. And nobody's going to tell me that I have to hate or despise you just because you say something that causes offence to a third party. Nor do I have to hate you just because I might disagree with you. But whatever we might think about these people, they are a charity. I'm not thrilled about the fact that they exist as a charity, but I do believe that these people are sincere. I think they're crazy, to be honest, but I think they're sincere. I think these guys, Alison, they see anti-Semitism and Jew hatred around every corner. They are batshit fucking crazy. That's what I think. And they believe that. Right?
They're insane, and they gave me.
They're not in it for financial gain, I don't believe.
Free publicity.
They did.
And they made my songs and me famous.
But I don't believe.
They shot themselves in the foot, and people see that, and they are angry because liberties are being removed. And the charities are not supposed to do that. They are supposed to help people, and they are not helping their own people. They are putting their own people in danger.
But you know what? I believe that whether they're putting their own people in danger or not is an arguable point. I understand why you're saying it, but I want to say, and I'm not in any way trying to, score points with anybody. Batshit crazy, I think these people are. Not just them, but I think they're sincere. I don't think they're in it for the money. They're in it because they believe. I could, just by the tone of the responses that we got to them, they hate you. They hate me. They would see, I don't want to say that they would see us disappear off the face of the earth, but they utterly revile us. People like you, people like me, even though I don't see the world in the same way you see the world, not that it matters, whether I do or whether I don't, they are full to the brim with hatred, righteous hatred, indignant hatred, to the point where they will attribute feelings and quotes to people who've never had those feelings or who've never said those things. They are wretched. But I believe they're sincere. I believe they believe. I've seen this guy falter. I've seen him on television. The guy is utterly convinced that it's Armageddon for Jewish people, and there is no evidence. In fact, all the evidence is to the contrary. And I want to talk about that, not just about them, but this horrible paradigm we exist in today. That's the most important part of it. This awful paradigm, this cancel culture, destroy people because they see the world in a certain way, or they believe a certain thing did or didn't happen. Therefore, this person now is persona non grata, because that's what they want to do to people like you. And they want people like me, even though I'm not in commercial media anymore, but I've got a big audience. They want me to hate you, and they want me not to talk to you. Guilt by association. They want to tell people like Anne Widdecombe, an old friend of mine, going back years, you can't go on the Richie Allen Show. Why? Well, because he had Alison Chabloz on. This is fucking lunacy. It's lunacy. But this is where we're going. And I'm not prodding or probing you. I'm just, in the questions I asked you, because there'll be people hearing you for the first time. They'll want me to have a go at you about some of the things you said. And I don't want to spend time doing that because we've done all that before. What are we going to do about this? This paradigm we walk into now where people, Alison, are being fired. I mean, you've been fired yourself. You talked about it. Because some arsehole went through a Twitter feed and went, oh, look what he said 5 years ago. Where are we going? Where's this going to end? It's madness.
Yes, it really is. You're right that they are completely insane. And, that kind of confirms my point that, in fact, they made me famous. They made me famous, and they made my songs famous, and made more people listen to my songs than, I had 200 YouTube followers when I first uploaded that song to YouTube. I had a slightly larger Twitter following, but, I was absolutely nobody. Absolutely nobody. What are we going to do about this? And Gideon Falter, yes, there's, he like that. They like to gloat when they win in quotes, quote unquote, win a prosecution. He wrote recently, I saw I'm not sure whether it was in the Times, or he was quoted as saying that finally the Crown prosecution is understanding the seriousness and the threat posed to British Jews. I am sure that I am now living in a golden age for British Jews.
Jesus.
See, he finds himself quite important because you tip your hat in one way because he went to the government, he managed to get me prosecuted. They were also responsible for this trial that saw me locked up for 3 days last week. They admit it openly. Oh, the probation service acted following our dealings with the probation service. They wrote about it before the trial, and they wrote about it when I was sentenced to prison. And we saw that it's kind of like a pound of flesh. My friend Ian Millard said that in some respects Shakespeare was the greatest Englishman to live, because there was an article in the Daily Mail with comments which were moderated. And there's the you can see from the thumbs up and thumbs down the Obviously, there's no comments that are pro me. It's all, oh, she's mad, oh, she's insane. And then there's the Jewish Chronicle and the Jewish News. None of those articles have been amended to say that I've been freed on unconditional bail. It's quite something, by the same judge.
By the same judge.
Add.
I mean, they can't have
it. Was the same judge.
The same judge. They can't have it their own way.
What are we going to do about it? I just have to keep doing. I had nothing to lose. That's what they didn't understand as well. I spoke to Gilad Atzmon. I know he's been on your show numerous times before. I spoke to Gilad also, who found himself in trouble. An Israeli, born Israeli, an ex-Jew, he calls himself, who also found himself in trouble with this charity supposed to be protecting Jews. But they'll go after their own. If people like Gilad aren't sticking to the narrative, it's all about that. It's all about making sure that their narrative dominates, that they dominate.
Yeah, but in fairness, let me jump in.
Life.
Let me jump in. In fairness, I've got to jump in there. In fairness, the campaign against anti-Semitism, if they were here now, sadly they're not, because they refuse to talk unless it's on Sky or the BBC or Channel 4. They won't come on programmes like this. They would say that Gilad wrote something on his website in an article that was untrue. They went after him for that, or Gideon Falter did, and received a financial settlement. They would say they weren't targeting Atzmon, that Gilad said something that was untrue. I know there was an allegation of libel. That's what they would say. And I have all the time in the world for Gilad Atzmon, and I see, I talk to him quite regularly. Look, I think the case and the judicial review is massively important. It's hugely important, because I don't have the legal language to say what it is I want to say. We must never allow opinions, whatever those opinions are, on whatever subject, be subject to legal review, let alone convictions in courts of law. Never. A woman like yourself or anybody singing songs about whether it's the Holocaust, whether it's smallpox blankets, Native Americans, whether it's the famine in Ireland, nobody should be arrested, let alone taken to court for writing songs about those events, whether they're nobody ever. It should never be allowed. It's absolutely terrifying, the implications of it. You made the point, I think, in one of the hearings, nobody was obliged to listen to your songs. And, that stayed with me. Nobody's obliged to listen to it. I would imagine most people, regardless, if you're Jewish and if you had some connection to Nazi Germany through an aunt or an uncle or a great aunt, I imagine most people would go, fucking Egypt. Referring to you. I'm not saying you're a fucking Egypt, by the way. I don't think you are. But fucking Egypt. And then just move on. Move on. Job done. She's a fucking Egypt. All right, move on. Yeah. But criminal convictions, no. And exiling people, no. Banning them. Saying that they can't exist on social media. Trying to make them a non-person, no. I'm not having it. I don't care how offensive somebody thinks it is. I'm not having it. I'm not going to put up with it. And I'll always make room for people on programmes. I'm no martyr now, by the way. But some of these people put my address and my phone number on Twitter, would you believe? Now, it must be said, nobody connected to the campaign against anti-Semitism did that. I must say that. It had nothing to do with them at all. I must make that perfectly clear. But some Zionists did that and urged people to come and see me. That's where we are now.
Someone tweeted as I was put in prison, oh good, 8 weeks. I hope that's long enough for someone to shiv her.
To stab you.
To stab me, yes.
These are sick people.
This is somebody connected with one of the witnesses, one of the campaign against anti-Semitism Crown witnesses in my trial. Someone with a connection to them, because it was on one of the witnesses' Facebook pages. And luckily I've got lots of people who look out for me, and we managed to get a screenshot of that. It's about confinement, isn't it? They try to confine us by banning us from various platforms, I've been banned from Twitter. And they try to confine us financially. Since I came out of prison, I've got these donation possibilities. People can donate to me if they like my work. All those have now been closed down, so I've got to find another solution so that I can actually try and earn a living. And what was the other thing? Yes, just to come back to the songs, the third song is I Like the Story as It Is, satire. And the satire is in the title. And I mock, stuff I ridicule stories that have been proven to be false, like the soap and lampshades and all that, but I'm still grossly offensive for ridiculing stuff that never happened, which just shows that these people, it's just about hurt feelings. It's the virtue signaling left and the virtue signaling lobbies that they jump on these things, but these things never happened. They were war propaganda lies. I mock those in my songs. And the last point that I want to make in this is that I was only convicted for my songs. Nothing that I've written, and there's pages and pages and pages of revisionist stuff on my blog, and I have a humorous style of writing. I do mock. It's true, I do. But that's our tradition, isn't it, Richie? England, sensibility, humour, and freedom, liberties. It's about liberties. It's about protecting our liberties. I've lost some of my liberties in fighting for our liberties. You see what I mean?
I do see what you mean.
But I think it's been worth it, because my case has really shone a spotlight on what is happening in other countries. I had no idea 10 years ago that people were being locked up for their opinions in so-called free liberal Western democracies, secular liberal. It's become a religion.
Well,
it's become, and people are being gulagged for on the word of those whose loyalty is first and foremost to a foreign power. I'm not saying that they're not also loyal to Britain. In many of the worst cases, the people who are most abusive towards me were born and went to school in Britain. But I was born and raised. I'm 100% English, and did everything. And these people, these foreign lobbyists, are getting the authorities to act to put people like me in prison in my own country because they simply do not agree. And for songs, for my artistic expression. That's why I told this officer, look, the fact that the Havana Gila came to me as an idea to write the refrain of this song, I don't know. How can I explain what inspires me as a musician? All I can say to you, officer, is that it was a gift from God. Obviously not the Jewish God, but that's what can I say? It's for my artistic work.
Let me jump back in, Alice. Alison Chabloz is our guest. Look, the campaign against anti-Semitism and its leaders, they would say, listen, we're British citizens here. We're not lobbying for Israel. We're British citizens. We believe that anti-Semitism is on the rise, and we believe that Alison Chabloz is out of order to write those songs. Therefore, we did what we did. That's what they would say. They would say they're not working for any foreign government, which is what they would say. Like I said again, I'm not trying to give anybody any pass here, but I do try to be fair. I do my best to be. Again, I'm not a martyr. I do my best to be fair. I totally agree with you in terms of it's outrageous to be locking people up for their opinions. It's repugnant to me. They might say, and I know tomorrow when I say they might say, some UK-based Jewish folks or even Zionists might say, Richie Allen is very quick to describe people as sick, but what about the songs of Alison Chabloz? Those are sick as well. To which I would say, and I have said, why don't you debate Alison Chabloz in a public forum? And it always comes back to this, and I never get a response, because I grew up where when I had opinions about people, I was forced to stand over those opinions by debating the people whose, maybe the people I was criticising. I was thrown into rooms with people that I disliked or that I criticised. Whether I liked it or not, I was told to man up or woman up. If you don't like that person, you don't like what he or she says, well, grow a pair of balls and debate them. And I've said 1,000 times to Zionists, how can you interview the likes of Alison Chabloz? She's this, she's that. I always say she's a human being. She's not evil.
It's like I'm the
Antichrist,
the secret love child of Hitler, and it's really, it's I really am being painted as the devil, but I don't know. It's just that the pound of flesh, they just want their pound of flesh, they can kill me, they can shiv me in prison, but they won't be able to kill my songs, and they are the ones who brought attention to my songs in the first place.
Ironically.
So like you're saying they're completely insane.
Look, yeah, I mean, I'll take some criticism for calling them batshit crazy. People will say, it's immature to say stuff like that. Of course, I'm not suggesting that they're clinically insane or anything like that. I'm not suggesting that at all. But I mean, it's a crazy set of circumstances to be chasing a woman through the courts to try and have her locked up because you don't like the songs that she's singing. It is absolutely insane. I don't give a shit if she's wrong. I don't care if Alison Chabloz is wrong. If she's wrong, debate her. Do you know, I was thinking yesterday, if I knew through my family somebody who was murdered in Germany, if I was Jewish, I couldn't wait to get you on a radio programme. You know, not to try and bully you or hammer you or abuse you or scream at you, but to challenge you. That's how I would, because it's the way I was brought up. I would say, hey, Chabloz, what's going on with these fucking songs? Let's have a conversation. You know, let's have a sit. I'm not happy. What are you doing? What's going on? But no, we don't live in these times anymore. It's cancel culture. It's label people. It's ban them. It's exile them. It's make them inhuman. They're trying to make you inhuman, subhuman. That I'm supposed to be tainted, made dirty by associating with you. I don't see you like that. I think you're wrong in some of the things you say. In other things you say, I think you've got a good point. I think you know that you're being offensive at times, but fuck it, that's what you do and that's who you are. I'm not going to hate you for that or despise you. I'll have a pint with you. I'll go to the football with you, you know. I'm not allowing this paradigm. I'm going to do all I can to stop it. You know, if you don't like somebody, get in a room with them, have a conversation.
Well, you know, they didn't. They already lost the argument in the 70s and 80s when the revisionists first, came with their questions, because that's all that's happened. It's just questioning, you know, this official narrative. They already lost the argument. They know that if they are going to have an open debate, that they are going to lose. That is the only reason why they don't want the debate. It is the last thing they want, and therefore they've, you know, installed these laws, these undemocratic anti-free speech laws in all the countries, especially the German-speaking countries. They're the most notorious. Funnily enough, last week in the French courts, both Alain Soral of Égalité et Réconciliation and Dieudonné, they were both. Alain Soral was convicted for 2 years for a song that he published on his website about the yellow vests. And he's on appeal. It's a different legal system. You don't get immediately chucked in jail in France. You can appeal, and as soon as the appeal is applied for, you're free until the appeal. They may well put him behind bars at one stage, but he's been sentenced to goodness knows how many years in prison so far and never been behind bars. And the same is true of Dieudonné, who I was saying influenced me, a French comedian earlier. He was also prosecuted last week. The trial has still to take place for a song called, in French, C'est mon choix, which is play on words. It's my choice, or it's my shower. And this song was written by his director of publications, who is a gentleman whose name is Germain Geff-Cohen. This gentleman's mother was Jewish.
Oh, right, okay.
This song was written by a Jewish man. And so Dieudonné went to the court and he said, yes, but I'm just interpreting the song that was written by this gentleman. Please, can we have the actual author of this song, this satirical song, so that he can explain to the court what drove him to write, as a Jewish person, what, you know, who lost family in Auschwitz, can come and explain to the court. And the court refused. So these associations, I'm sorry to say, and it's the same in France as it is in Germany and Italy and elsewhere and in Britain, they do not speak for all Jews. They have the power and the influence because they have their big funders behind them, the likes of Alan Sugar probably, and Philip Green, BHS ripped off how many people's pension funds, and then it was Robert Maxwell before him. These people do not speak for all Jews.
No, of course they don't. Look, and we could have spent hours on what constitutes Zionism. Look, you said it earlier on, the idea that there's a Jewish conspiracy. And I have had an email from Alan Cohen with a big smiley face saying, that's my real name, Alan Cohen. And he says, I'm listening with interest. I don't like Alison's songs, but then he said, I don't, I'm paraphrasing because it's a long email. He says, but then I'm not obliged to listen to them. I agree with you that people shouldn't be exiled or ostracised or banned because of their opinions, no matter how repugnant somebody might find them. He goes on to say, it's a long email, this. I might invite him on the programme, actually. But he does go to say that he's not saying that you have insinuated this, Alison Chabloz, because you haven't. But he says, Richie, some Jews do get sick and tired of listening to independent media programmes where it is inferred, often inferred, he writes, that there is a little cabal of Jews who are manipulating global events. It's not true. He said you can talk about bankers, you can talk about Zionists and Rothschilds and people like that hiding behind Judaism and all the rest of it. But he says, Jewish people do get sick and tired of this notion that we're a collective of people that are trying to, control and manipulate global events. It's just patently ridiculous, he says. But he echoes what we've been saying about the right to cause offence, whether meant or not, whether implied or whether meant. I find that very interesting. We're just about running out of time. Look, we're definitely going to speak again because, first of all, we will. But I want to follow the judicial review. I think everybody should follow that. That's going to be fascinating, the conclusion that they reach. Nobody's going to tell me who I can and who I can't like. Nobody's going to tell me that I have to dislike somebody because they sang something or said something that somebody else was offended by. I'm not going to tolerate that. It's not happening. I don't think you're evil. I don't think you're some sort of satanic, antichrist type figure who has to be avoided at all costs. I'll never be told by anybody that I have to think that. Free speech and freedom of expression. Do we even have it? We obviously don't. No. It obviously doesn't exist in this country anymore. But there we go. I'm going to give you the absolute final word. Glad you're not in prison. You have no idea. I'm glad you're not in prison. And I know we could have spoken about your experience because you've written about it on your blog. I'm going to put a tweet out to where people can read about the last few days. I'll give you the final word in 45 seconds, Alison. Over to you. Go ahead.
I'd just like to say thank you very much. Thanks very much, Richie. It was a great pleasure to be back. It's been a while. I don't think I've been on since before my also like to say big thanks to my lawyers, Adrian Davis and Kevin Lara Mullins, to my mum and dad, and to Nick Colostrom, to Gilad Atzman, to Ian Millard, to Shazia Hobbs, to Simon Harris, to Germa Rudolph. I'm sure I'm forgetting loads of people. I was intending to make a list before I came on, but I was on the phone to Germa Rudolph, and so I didn't have time. So if I'm forgetting anybody, I'm sorry, but I just thank you so much to all the wonderful messages that I've received over the past few days, and it's been quite amusing to read through what's being said on social media and in the mainstream. Thank you so much again, Richie, for having me on. I'm really grateful.
Anytime.
And, wishing everybody a very nice week. And the judicial review will be the 31st of October. I will be able to keep you updated on my website, which is AlisonChabloz.com, unless they shut down that down.
Unless they shut it down.
But I don't think they will.
Well, we'll get you back on at that time anyway. I'm in overtime now, so I better get out of the programme. Alison, good luck with it. Thanks for coming back. And I look forward to speaking to you again real soon. Alison Chabloz on the Richie Allen Show. That's it for the programme. Thanks for listening to it. Leaving you with the Eagles. Big shout out to Christopher Monckton and Alison Chabloz. See you tomorrow at 9:30 for the newspaper review. Until then, adios.